Back in 2001, late 2001, if anyone's old enough to remember that, after the September 11th attacks, the U.S. military and its NATO partners came up with a strategy to topple the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. I'm going to get to why that's relevant right now. Basically, they partnered with a group of rebels that were based in the Panjshir Valley in the north of Kabul to move in with special forces and air support to Kabul and topple the Taliban using these Northern Alliance forces, as they were called, to topple the Taliban. They were the ground troops. They were the people who would hold the ground as the Taliban fled and as the U.S. airstrikes came through. And now it appears that the Trump administration, in its war against Iran, has come up with a similar plan to try to take down the regime in Tehran. Ironically, Tehran was a partner in that alliance. It was a backer of the Northern Alliance back then in 2001. I am Borzu Deragahi. This is the Badlands podcast, part of the newsletter that I put out. It's at borzu.substack.com. That should be right here, borzou.substack.com. I might write something at some point more extensive on the Kurdish plan as it's being leaked to various news outlets and confirmed by some Kurdish militant groups that are based in northern Iraq. I've put out feelers to the Kurdish groups and so on. And I think this is a really, really bad idea. I don't think it's going to work. I think it's going to backfire for the Americans. It's going to backfire on the Kurds as well. It might create a lot of chaos and a lot of violence and distractions for everybody. And that could benefit Israel. Israel has said that one of their possible goals is a destruction of the Iranian state, having it collapse into a state of civil war. This is a recipe for that. And I'm going to explain why. I'm one of the few journalists in the world who has spent time in all four corners of what is called Kurdistan. I've spent time in Iranian Kurdistan and a lot of time among Kurds in Iran. I've spent time, a lot of months, put in a lot of time in Iraqi Kurdistan, in the semi-autonomous region called the Kurdistan Regional Government, the three provinces of the northern Iraq. I've also spent time in the Syrian part of the Kurdish area during the war against ISIS. I actually embedded with the PKK forces there. And I've also spent time, significant time in the southeast of Turkey. I'm right now in Istanbul. That's where I live. I have a pretty good feel for, I guess, what you would call like the Kurdish milieu in the Middle East. I have a sense of the cities, a sense of the towns, a sense of the different cultures, the different dialects. And I have basically come to the conclusion that this plan is really kind of evil in a way. Because here's the thing. So according to news outlets, New York Times, Washington Post, leaks they're getting from the CIA and from Pentagon officials and so on, and also some measure of confirmation from the authorities in northern Iraq. The plan is to get these group of 5 or so Kurdish rebel groups, Iranian Kurdish rebel groups. They include a group called Komala. They include the Kurdistan Democratic Party of Iran. There is the PJAK, which is the offshoot of the PKK. And to get these guys together and have them invade Iran, here's why it won't work. Well, first of all, Kurds in Iran are maybe 10% of the population, maybe even like less. There's other groups that are similar to the Kurds, like the LOR, that could be counted upon to support the Kurdish parties, but that's not definite. And I would say also that Iranian Kurds are themselves divided. There are Shia Kurds, there are Sunni Kurds, there are secular Kurds, there are religious Kurds, there are Kurds that don't want anything to do with this insurgency and so on. They don't want anything to do with the regime either, and they just want to mind their own business. But the other thing is that unlike the Northern Alliance and the Afghanistan in 2001, the Kurds are kind of far away from the capital. The Northern Alliance were perched in the Panjshir Valley, which is, if you've ever been to Afghanistan, it's like kind of the bottom of the Panjshir Valley is basically Kabul. So, they're basically like this dagger coming down and hitting the capital there. And so it's not that hilly and formidable to get from the Panjshir Valley to Kabul. Meanwhile, the geography in Iran is totally different. So you have Tehran here in the middle northwest of the country, and then you have the Kurds here, and then between them there is this like a couple of rather formidable mountain ranges. So they would have to get past that. And then there's another issue that is the sort of the demographic issue. And that is the fact that Iran is 1/4 maybe Azeri, and they tend to be focused and concentrated in that same area where the Kurds are. As a matter of fact, I would say that, past kings probably encouraged the Azeris to settle in that area as a hedge against the Kurds, who've always wanted their own homeland. And so not only would they have to get past these mountains, they'd have to get past to take control of the cities, to Urumiyeh, Tabriz, Hamadan. They would have to get past the Azeris in that area. And although the Azeris are not, super pro-regime or something like that, they do have a lot of supporters in the regime. And let me give you one of them. The recently killed Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, was an Azeri. His son has Azeri roots. The opposition leader who's under house arrest, Mir Hossein Mousavi, really Azeri, he speaks Persian with a very heavy Azeri accent. So they actually make up a segment of the elite that is controlling the regime. And so the Kurds would have to deal with cities like Tabriz, deal with cities like Urumiyeh, Hamadan, to get to Tehran. And that is a long way, and there's a lot of hostility. These Kurdish rebels driving pickup trucks, perhaps backed by Israeli and U.S. airstrikes, they would have a very formidable challenge getting to the capital and taking control. I just don't think that's going to happen. I would also say that having spent time with some of these groups in the northern Iraqi mountains, including a bit of time with the Pejak folks and the Komala folks, KDPI base. I did actually a story once years ago where I just spent time hanging out with these Iranian opposition groups, and they all said, even back then, that they were in touch with the CIA. It appears that they're being manipulated now to launch this attack on behalf of the U.S.-Israeli war plans. And it's going to be a failure. It's going to be really bloody, and it's going to cause the regime to really go after these Kurdish rebel groups. And it's also going to possibly destabilize northern Iraq, because up until now, the Iranians have been a little bit restrained about attacking that little semi-autonomous experiment up there in northern Iraq. They have done some attacks on the U.S. base there, but they could do a lot more, and they have done a lot more in the past. In addition, these Kurds, the Kurdish rebel groups, they don't really want to take control of the country. They don't have the aim to take control of the country. What they do want is an Iranian Kurdistan to match the Iraqi Kurdistan, and maybe even, a Turkish Kurdistan. And that is kind of a problem for Turkey. And so you're going to have Turkey all of a sudden looking at this situation here, essentially perhaps recalculating its assessment to stay out of this thing and let the Americans do whatever they want to do, even though they're quite against it, the Turkish government, and perhaps intervene on Iran's behalf just to prevent the Kurds of Iran from setting up a statelet. If you want to see how they could react, to that situation, to anything resembling a Kurdish statelet in Iran, just look at what happened when the Iraqi Kurds tried to set up a statelet. They were adamantly opposed to that, and they pretty much closed the border. And I think that if I do recall, they closed the oil pipeline that leads from northern Iraq into Turkey, the Ceylan pipeline. They basically were willing to give up revenue from that pipeline in order to shut down the Iraqi Kurdistan's experiment in setting up a little statelet when they had a referendum some years back. So I think that Americans kind of know this, at least the smart people in the Pentagon and the CIA. I'm pretty sure they understand this. But I think that Israelis understand that this is not a realistic plan. But what it is a realistic plan for is creating a lot of havoc that is not in Israel, creating a lot of chaos in that corner of the world that will distract the Iranians, it will distract the Turks, and so on, and it will allow them to further their own aims, which seems to be like, blowing up a football stadium, soccer stadium in Tehran, the latest was. So I think that this is a really bad idea, and I think that the Kurds should refrain, and the Iraqi Kurds should also not let the Iranian Kurds launch this operation that is apparently being planned. So anyway, I think this is a really awful idea and not good for Iranians, not good for Iraqis, not good for Turkey, not going to contribute to democracy in the region, only going to contribute to chaos that will hurt the American agenda. It will disrupt energy flows. It will create civilian suffering and refugee flows that hurts the West, that hurts America. But I guess it benefits Israel because they get to do whatever they want if their rivals and enemies are consumed with internal conflict. Anyway, again, I'm Borzu Deragahi. Please subscribe to my newsletter. Please follow me on social media if you want. My X or Twitter handle is Borzou, B-O-R-Z-O-U. Thanks a lot.